Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you today. I'm very happy that you all joined us for today's webinar about best practice for quick and compliant fat determination. My name is Claudia Blum. I'm a product manager for extraction solutions at BUCHI at the headquarters in Switzerland. I will be the presenter today. I will show you two short clips from our laboratory where you can see my colleague Maren Sander. She's product specialist for extraction solutions. This is today's agenda. First, I'll give you a short introduction about fat determination and about the workflow from the sample to the result, for fat determination according to Weibull-Stoldt, and also for fat determination in crude fat. Then the major section will be how to avoid pitfalls along this workflow, with focus on first the hydrolysis step and second on the extraction step. In the hydrolysis step, we'll have a look on how to carry out an acid hydrolysis. Is this a useful step or is it just a waste of time to do this hydrolysis? And of course, I will explain you how the BUCHI solution, the HydrolEx H-506, works for acid hydrolysis of the samples. And we'll have a look in the lab to see how it's working in reality. In the extraction step, we'll discuss about the 3 different extraction methods that BUCHI is offering in its FatExtractor. I'll discuss a little bit the characteristics of each extraction method and how to find out which extraction method suits to your need. And we'll have a look at the BUCHI's FatExtractor that is designed for fat determination. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session, so there we have enough time that I can answer your questions. If you have questions during the webinar, please write it into the questions field on the GoToWebinar form. We will at the end then come to all these questions and I will answer them. So first, my 2 laboratories have to do fat determination. Fat is one of the major components of food and feed, and it's in most countries necessary to label them on the envelope, so on the packaging. So you need fat to determine fat for this labeling of the nutrition facts. It's also important to control or to assess the quality of raw materials that is used for food or feed production, and also to control the quality of the final or the semi-finished products. It is also necessary to extract fat from food and feed samples if you need it for further analysis. For example, some contaminants are determined in the fat fraction, or it is necessary to assess the fat quality, so you need to extract it first from the sample. The requirements for fat determination are the same as for most other analyses that are done in laboratories. You need a reliable and a robust method. It needs to be compliant to standard methods that have to be applied locally or to international standard methods. Everybody wants to have fast processes with low costs per sample, and what is also important, that the method is easy to use and it has low user interaction, so that the user in the laboratory has time to do other things while the extraction is running. And I'll try to explain you how we can fulfill all these requirements for fat determination with the BUCHI solutions during this webinar. So this is the workflow from a sample to the result. So on the left-hand side, you will see as an example a cookie, and on the right-hand side, you see the labeling of the nutrition facts of this cookie. So first, the sample needs to be homogenized. You need absolutely homogeneous sample to have in order to be the sample having it representative, that you get a low variation within the results of the duplicates or triplicates that you are doing. With BUCHI, we offer the mixer B400, a very powerful mixer that can be used for this purpose. Then the sample weight needs to be recorded, and we also need to weigh the beakers, the empty beakers, to get the tare weight. Then for total fat determination, according to the Weibull-Stoldt method, so the compliant fat determination, the samples need to be hydrolyzed with hydrochloric acid. This can be done on BUCHI's HydrolEx H-506. The hydrolysis step is made to break up the sample matrix and to set the fat free to make it better extractable in the extraction step. After hydrolysis, we extract the sample with the FatExtractor according to one of the 3 extraction methods that we are offering that I will explain you later, Soxhlet, hot extraction, or ECE. we extract the fat with an organic solvent. Then the solvent is boiled off, and we have the pure fat in the beakers, and this need to be weighed on an analytical balance. And with this extracted fat, we can calculate the fat content of the sample. If only the crude fat is determined, or we also call it free fat, the workflow remains the same. It's just that the hydrolysis step is skipped. So along these workflows, there are several pitfalls that I would like to explain to you and give you a strategy how to avoid them. First, the sample needs really homogeneous to get representative samples and reliable results. So it's really important that you have a powerful mixer or blender, that your sample gets homogeneous, and this homogenization process should not take too long because the sample can warm up. And this, you know, when fat is getting warm, it gets more liquid and it tends to stick on the beaker and makes the sample not inhomogeneous. So this can really falsify a result if all the fat is sticking on the beaker wall instead of being in your sample. Then when you weigh the beakers, it's important that you use an analytical balance that is really in a good condition. So it needs to be calibrated regularly. It needs to be on a good position in the laboratory where it's calm, we have no air current, etc. And we recommend to use an analytical balance with 4 digits after the comma, so plus minus 0.1 milligram. The sample weight that you choose is depending on the expected fat content. We recommend that at the end you have 0.5 to 0.7 grams extracted in your beakers. So for example, if your sample has a fat content of 10%, you would use between 5 and 7 grams of sample. Of course, this cannot be, you cannot stick to these recommendations if your sample has a very low fat content. Of course, then you have to reduce the total amount of fat that is extracted. But we recommend not to go lower than 0.1 gram of fat extracted, because otherwise your variation will be very high within the duplicates or triplicates. It is also important that you use cold and clean beakers to record the tare weight. So the beakers, they need to be heated up in a drying oven for 30 minutes, and then you have to let them cool down in a desiccator for a certain amount of time that they get really cold and ambient temperature. In the hydrolysis step, it is important that you assure a complete hydrolyzation and you avoid the sample loss. The samples tend to foam when they're boiled in hydrochloric acid, so this is important that you prevent the foaming because the foam can stick then to the glass sample walls and the sample might get lost. It is also important that you assure a complete sample transfer because the sample is actually hydrolyzed in one vessel and then transferred to another glass sample tubes, and this transfer needs to be complete, otherwise you will lose sample. But now we'll go into details to see the important points in the acid hydrolysis. Again, the goals of this acid hydrolysis is to break up the matrix and make fat accessible for the extraction. Many food samples are very complex. They have proteins, carbohydrates, and the fat is actually enclosed within these other components of the sample. And then, of course, the solvent cannot really access this fat, and it's really hard to completely extract the fat and get a full fat recovery. So within this acid hydrolysis, the hydrochloric acid actually destroys the sample structures and makes the fat accessible for the extraction. This is also the reason why the fat recoveries are usually higher after a hydrolysis step than without this hydrolysis step. And this hydrolysis step is mandatory for many of the official methods and also to all methods that are according to Weibull-Stoldt. The hydrolysis consists of 3 steps. First, the sample is boiled in 4 molar hydrochloric acid, typically for 30 minutes. Then the sample is diluted, filtrated, and rinsed to a neutral pH. And then the sample is finally dried before it is then extracted. On this table, I would like to, with this data on this table, I'd like to discuss a little bit if this hydrolysis step is useful or just a waste of time. We know that many of our customers do the hydrolysis step before the fat extraction, but also some laboratories, they don't do this hydrolysis step. The reasons behind can be different. Either it's not mandatory by the standard methods, or they don't really see the necessity of this hydrolysis step. And here I'd like to discuss a little bit if this step is worthwhile investing the time or just not worthwhile. So the time that you need for this hydrolysis step is 30 minutes for the boiling, but of course with preparation and drying it needs about 1.5 hours. If you skip this step, of course you don't need these 30 minutes, but sometimes the preparation of the sample can be quite complicated because the samples need to be perfectly dry before an extraction. So if the sample is moist, it needs to be dried. Sometimes it needs to be even drying overnight, so it takes a lot of time. The chemicals is 100 milliliters of 4 molar hydrochloric acid. You also need sea light and sand. Or for manual hydrolysis without BUCHI or another equipment, you also need filtered paper. For direct extraction, of course, you need no chemicals, unless you need sodium sulfate, sand, or sea light to mix up your sample to dry it in order to be extracted. This is one of the major advantages of the hydrolysis, that actually the samples can also be liquid or moist. It does not matter how dry they are. So you can really use all the samples for the hydrolysis. For direct extraction, as I explained, you have to dry them either with a sample pre-treatment or with drying beforehand. The extraction process is after the hydrolysis step is the same for all sample matrices. So it does not matter if before the sample was a cookie or a piece of meat or whatever, the same extraction method can apply because all the matrix effects of the samples are neutralized in the hydrolysis step. For direct extraction, it depends a little bit on the sample type and on the amount of fat and the accessibility of fat. The extraction parameters might be varying. The fat recovery is usually higher after hydrolysis step, and because you determine the total fat. And in direct extraction, it's only the free fat, so the easy accessible fat that is determined. So generally the recovery is lower for direct extraction. I have here some samples that have been analyzed in our application laboratory. So all the samples with CRM or certified reference material samples. You can see the top 4 samples that had lower recoveries without the hydrolysis step, and the CRM samples were outside of the specified values. The 2 samples below, the processed meat and the potato chips, they both had the same fat recovery with and without hydrolysis. So we can conclude that the acid hydrolysis is very useful for samples where the fat is mechanically or chemically enclosed in the sample matrix, or if the sample is moist, because then you can skip the longer preparation time and drying time before extraction. And it's also necessary or very useful for laboratories with many different sample types, because then they can treat all the samples the same. They don't have to adjust the preparation or the extraction parameters. We can also see that it's not necessary or a waste of time for samples where the fat is freely accessible. So added as an ingredient, like in cookies or in a sausage, for this processed meat, where the fat is really free and it was actually added within the recipe to this food, or in fried products as potato chips, because there the fat is only on the surface and can easily be washed out in the extraction step. If a user does an acid hydrolysis, we offer the HydrolEx H-506. And I would like to present you some of the most important features and benefits of this solution. We have a dedicated hydrolysis vessel, so wide glass vessel where you can have a lot high sample weight weigh-in. So this is important for low-fat samples. You can weigh in up to 10 grams of sample, so this gives you a high enough fat recovery to get reliable results. Because the vessels are so wide, the foaming is reduced, so the risk is lower that you lose sample during the hydrolysis step. During the hydrolysis step, we apply a powerful vacuum. This evacuates the acid fumes, and it also helps to filtrate and rinse the samples after the hydrolysis. We now offer a kit from a vacuum pump and a big collection bottle so you don't need the water jet pump that was usually applied to evacuate the fumes during the process. So we now have a water saving and sustainable solution to generate the vacuum. The rinsing funnels, number 3, are specially designed to really rinse off all the remainings after the hydrolysis step from the walls of the hydrolysis vessel, so to ensure a complete sample transfer. The sample is then collected in the glass sample tubes, number 4, and these glass sample tubes fit perfectly into the fat extractor used for the extraction of the fat later on. Now I would like to show you the movie, how this my colleague Maren Sander is actually hydrolyzing samples in the laboratory. And just a second.
Herzlich willkommen bei uns im Kundenlabor. Hinter mir läuft bereits die Hydrolyse HydrolEx H-506, im Moment mit einer Lebensmittelprobe hydrolysiert. Die Lebensmittelprobe befindet sich in dem Hydrolyseglas, zusammen mit Zelit und Salzsäure. Das Ganze ist mit dem Spültrichter abgeschlossen und verbunden mit der Glasprobenhülse. In der Glasprobenhülse befindet sich auch Zelit. Aufgrund der Breite der Gläser schäumen die Proben hier nicht. Der Spültrichter hat mehrere Löcher, sodass bei der Filtration das Wasser schön am Glasrand runtergespült wird und so wirklich die ganze Probe runtergewaschen wird. Im Moment sind nur 4 Positionen besetzt, das heißt, mit Hilfe der Absperrhähne hier kann ich die Positionen, die nicht gebraucht werden, gut deaktivieren. Die Proben haben jetzt 30 Minuten gekocht und werden jetzt mit warmem Wasser verdünnt. Mit Hilfe des Hebels können nun die Proben hochgezogen werden und die Filtration kann beginnen. Die Hydrolyse ist mit dem Vakuumpumpenset verbunden, sodass die Spüllösung schön in der 5-Liter-Flasche gesammelt werden kann. Die gesamte Probe wird nun mit Wasser aus dem Hydrolyseglas ausgewaschen und filtriert. Und wie man sieht, mit Hilfe des Spüldeckels wird wirklich das Glas schön am Rand sauber gewaschen. Dies wird so lange wiederholt, bis das Glas wirklich sauber ist und die Probe hinterher pH-neutral ist. Wenn alle Proben filtriert sind, kann die Hydrolyse beendet werden. Das heißt, das Vakuum wird abgeschaltet, zunächst belüftet und die Hydrolyse ist beendet. Nach der Hydrolyse müssen die Proben getrocknet werden und mit einer Schicht Sand überdeckt werden. Nun sind sie bereit für die Extraktion. Also die Hydrolyse mit HydrolEx ist wirklich besonders einfach, aber am besten gefällt mir wirklich die Kombination mit dem Pumpenset, sodass man auch umweltfreundlich hydrolysieren kann.
Thank you, Maren, for this insight in the laboratory. We'll now go on to the extraction step. So after hydrolysis, the samples are dried and cooled down, and then they're ready to be extracted. The extraction can be done in the FatExtractor E-500, and here it's really important that you use really dry samples. So whenever there's a residual moisture in the sample, the fat extraction gets really difficult because the water is not miscible with the organic solvent and it really repels the solvent from really going into the sample matrix and extract the fat. It is also important that you choose optimized parameters for a complete extraction. And at the end of the extraction process, when the solvent is boiled off and only the fat remains in the beakers, it's important that you choose the optimal parameters, that you gently dry the extract. If the extract is not dried well, but it gets too warm or too hot, this can falsify also the results. We'll now have a closer look into the extraction. The parameters actually for an exhaustive, so for a complete fat extraction, are the following. First is the choice of solvent. For fat determination, very often petroleum ether or hexane is used. Some countries, they prefer diethyl ether or even chloroform to do the fat extraction. The extraction time and the number of cycles also are important. That is enough time and enough number of cycles in order to get all the fat out of the sample. The solvent turnover or the drop rate need to be sufficient. So generally it needs to be at least 10 milliliters per minute that is evaporated and condensed and flushed through the sample to get good results. So it's important that you set the correct heating level depending on the solvent you have for your extraction. And the sample again, it needs to be dry, homogeneous, and it's best that when it has a large surface, so then the extraction is easier. To preserve the fat after extraction can be done when the drying is really gentle and optimized, so not a too long time and not too hot. So this needs to be optimized. In the fat extractor, we have the smart drying function that actually takes away this optimization work from you, and the system does it fully automated. There are three different extraction methods that BUCHI offers in its fat extractor. It is Soxhlet, the ECE method, or the hot extraction method. ECE is an abbreviation for economic continuous extraction, and actually it's the same extraction principle as the extraction according to Twisselmann, according to BUT, continuous extraction, or according to Goldfish. So all these expressions are actually synonyms. It's all the same, and this extraction method is correspond to the ECE version of BUCHI's fat extractor. The hot extraction is also called Randle or submersion extraction. This is also the same principle covered by BUCHI's hot extraction. We can see here the principle of each extraction method. So on the left-hand side, this is the most classic extraction method, is Soxhlet, invented more than 100 years ago by Mr. Soxhlet and very widely used all around the world for fat determination. The principle is actually that the sample sits in a specific Soxhlet extraction chamber, so is separated from the extract, and the extraction is done in cycles. In the traditional glassware, the chamber is emptied when it is full by a siphon, and in the automated version from BUCHI, we have an optical sensor that determines the level of the solvent in the chamber, and whenever the level is reached, the magnetic valve opens to empty the chamber and let the extract flush down to the beaker. So the characteristic is also that the extraction is done in cycles. For the economic continuous extraction or the Twisselmann extraction, we also have the separation of the sample from the extract, but it stands directly on top of the boiling solvent. So the sample is heated up by the solvent vapors and then extracted by the condensing solvent that drips through the sample. In the hot extraction, the sample stands in the boiling solvent in the extraction phase and is then rinsed to avoid that there's still fat sticking on the sample container. So the rinsing is done by reducing the sample volume in so-called drain intervals and is then rinsed. You can also see here on the slide typical extraction times and used solvent volumes per sample. For, in this case, as an example, we took hydrolyzed samples, so it's between 90 minutes for Soxhlet and 40 minutes for hot extraction. Also, solvent volume is highest in Soxhlet. We need about 100 milliliters of solvent, 70 for ECE, and only 50 for hot extraction. Now we can discuss a little bit the pros and the cons for each extraction method to find out what are the differences and the justification to choose one of each of these methods. So the method optimization is very easy for Soxhlet and ECE. We have only actually the heating level of the solvent, of course, and also the number of cycles or time that can be increased. So when the recovery is not sufficient, you can simply increase the extraction time and you will get out a better result. For the hot extraction, it's more complex, so you can increase the time, but also the solvent volumes and the number of drains, because this, the solvent volume is used during the process to rinse the sample. So this all has an influence on the all parameters that influence the result. So the winner for this method optimization is actually Soxhlet or EC, because this is a lot easier than the hot extraction. As I said, Soxhlet is widely used all over the world. So in most standard methods, Soxhlet is actually mentioned as being the extraction method to be used. So in very many international standards and also local standards, Soxhlet is demanded. But there are also standard methods that are asking for the EC, so the continuous extraction, for example, by AOCS for oil seeds. And there are also some AOAC or a few local standards that demand for this continuous extraction. Hot extraction is also mentioned in some standard methods, but here for me the Soxhlet is the winner because this is the mostly recognized extraction method. The typical extraction time is highest for Soxhlet and lowest for hot extraction. So in regards of time, we have a clear winner of hot extraction. Solvent volume is also lowest in hot extraction because we don't have this chamber that needs to be filled as in solvent, as in Soxhlet. So here the winner is hot extraction. The investment on the instrument is highest in Soxhlet because the glass chamber is very complex, and also this optical sensor and magnetic valve need to be purchased, whereas the extraction chamber in EC is less complex, and in the hot extraction don't even need an extraction chamber. So the investment to buy a new instrument is lowest in hot extraction. The robustness of the method and the risk of handling errors is actually the last point I would like to discuss. So the risk of handling errors is very, very low in Soxhlet and ECE, because there's, even if somebody adds more solvent or less solvent, sets the needs more sand or less sand to cover the sample, or needs more or less sample, whatever, it is all does not influence the result. It's really very robust. For hot extraction, as there's a combination of solvent volume, sample volume, how much solvent is absorbed by the sample, how many drain intervals do I program, the risk of handling errors is actually higher in hot extraction. Therefore, we have the winner, Soxhlet and ECE. So you can see here we cannot say one method is better than the other. All they have their advantages and disadvantages. So I think for laboratories with many different sample types, it's better to go to Soxhlet or EC because there's more robust and less depending on the sample type. If a laboratory has always the same sample, they optimize it for their hot extraction. This can be really a good solution, a low-cost solution with a very high sample throughput. The FatExtractor E-500 is our solution for fat determination. I'd like to explain you some of the important features and benefits. All the extraction method that I explained to you can be actually built in on the same platform. So if someone buys a fat extractor with one of the extraction method, he can later change the extraction method to another one by simply changing the glassware. This exchange is very easy to do, so we don't need any trained service technician to do this exchange, but any laboratory operator can do it by himself, taking out the glass parts and putting in the other extraction chamber or the beakers, and then this instrument is ready to be used for another extraction method. The glass designs has been optimized in order to really accelerate the extraction processes. 90 minutes for Soxhlet is a lot longer than for hot extraction, but if you compare this process time with traditional Soxhlet process, this is a lot faster. This could be achieved by really optimizing the glass parts, reducing dead volumes, reducing volumes, and optimizing this magnetic valve optical sensor combination. We can actually reuse the solvent that has been used for the extraction, because at the end of the extraction process, when the solvent is boiled off, it is collected directly after the condenser, so it's freshly distilled, collected then in this detachable laboratory bottle you can see at number 3, and then can be reused for the next fat extractions. The system is very tight, so there is no solvent smell outside of the instrument, so we can also use it outside of the fume hood, with the exception, of course, of chlorinated solvents because of health issues. And the acetylester, as it is very volatile, you'll still get smell if you operate it outside of the fume hood. So for these two solvents, we recommend the fume hoods, but for hexane or petroleum ether, it is not necessary to work inside a fume hood. The operation of the instrument is very user-friendly and intuitive. So we have a screen where you can add your methods and start your extractions. We have a predefined standard method already in the interface programmed, and we also, depending on the solvent you choose, the correct heating levels are also already preset. And as I mentioned, we have the smart drying function so that the drying step is no concern for the user, but the system dries off the sample fully automated. We also will have a look at the laboratory, how the FatExtractor is operated by my colleague Maren Sander.
Ich bestücke nun den FatExtractor E-500 mit den getrockneten Proben. Und stelle den Becher mit dem Lösungsmittel hinein. Nun muss ich den Levelsensor an das Probenniveau anpassen. Und dieser Levelsensor wird so eingestellt, dass er an der oberen Kante der Probe sich befindet. Nun wird das Schutzschild geschlossen. Und ich kann die Methode programmieren. Dafür stelle ich die Zyklenzahl ein. Und wir werden das Smart Drying verwenden. Jetzt kann ich die Extraktion starten. Die Extraktion dauert jetzt natürlich einige Zeit, darum gehen wir erstmal zurück ins Studio.
And then during the time where the extraction is running, my colleague Maren Sander does not need to check on the instrument every now and then because everything is fully automated. And she even can use the extraction reports app. With this app, you can get push messages and you can see the real status of the instrument on your mobile phone with this free to download app. And then you get a message whenever you have to return to the instrument when the extraction is finished, or in case there's any error message being displayed on the instrument, you get a push message on your phone. So this really frees up your time. You don't need to babysit the instrument, and you can really do other things either in the laboratory or in your office on your desk. This app also allows you to generate a report of your extraction, so you're fully documented. And it also allows to do the calculation for gravimetric analysis like the fat determination. So we're almost at the end of our extraction process. We finally have to weigh the sample, the fat that is extracted in the beaker. So this we do also analytical balance. And here it's also important that you weigh only dry and cold beakers. So after the extraction, the beakers are dried in a drying oven as well, cooled down in a desiccator, and then they're weighed. So it's important that your procedure for weighing is the same for the tare weight as well as for the weighing of the extracted fat. And then you get perfect results for fast and compliant fat determination. So this is actually almost the end of this webinar, my presentation. So if you want to have more information, we have plenty of booklets and tools that will help you. The first one is actually a pocket guide for many hints how to optimize extraction methods. If you need the guidance how to choose the extraction method and the extraction instrument for your need, we have an interactive decision tree where you are guided through with, by answering questions to your application. We have movies and animations on how the instrument and the extraction method works. And of course, you find all the information on our instruments on our BUCHI web page. Here's the link for all the instruments for classical extraction. So thanks a lot for your attention. We're now at the end of my presentation, and now it's time that I can answer your extraction questions. So please write your questions in the chat box or in the questions box. and we'll answer it. So I will check if there are already questions. Yeah, there's one question. Is there a way to determine cycles in EC and hot extraction, such as in Soxhlet? Of course, there's no cycles as it is mentioned in Soxhlet, but we actually calculate or we count the drops and determine how many milliliters are boiled off and condensed in a certain time. So we say that at least 10 milliliters per minute needs to be turned over, so evaporated and condensed, and this you can estimate by counting the drops that fall off the condenser. There's another question: how to export the data or report. So actually, you can generate a PDF report that is on your mobile phone, and this PDF report you can send to your email account or to your desktop computer, or you just can print it out from your mobile phone. You can also export the data in the XML versions, and this XML version allows the customer to actually allows everybody to integrate this data into a LIMS system if this is present in the laboratory. There's another question: is the E-500 Soxhlet faster regarding extraction times if you compare it to the E-816 Soxhlet? So the E-816 Soxhlet was the previous version of the automated Soxhlet unit from BUCHI. And yes, we could speed up the extraction processes in the new instrument compared to the previous version by really optimizing the glass components. So we reduced the volume of the glass sample tubes that you have where the sample is in after hydrolysis compared to the extraction chamber. So there's less solvent volume that is needed to fill up the chamber, so each cycle is faster. And we also reduced the amount of sand and sea light, so the sample itself is smaller and the level sensor can set lower. So these are actually the two major impact factors that we could speed up the extraction process. Before we needed about 2 hours for 20 cycles, and now these 20 cycles are done in 75 minutes. So it's really tremendously faster than the previous version. There is another question: how many times you can reuse the solvent? Actually, we say normally about 5 times, but in reality, there is always one portion of solvent that is soaked up by the sample. And this portion needs to be replaced by fresh solvent. So that's why we always have a mixture of fresh and old used solvent. So there's not a real recommendation that after 5 times the extraction is not good anymore. Another question is if the sea light passes through the frit during the extraction process and in the beaker or in the extraction chamber, so how get rid of the sea light? So first, if sea light breaks through, you have to make sure that the amount of sand you use in the glass sample tube is sufficient. So really make sure that your sand bed is 20 grams for the new instrument or 50 grams for the old instrument, because then you can prevent most of the sea light passing through. I know that after several extractions, there's still some traces of sea light that can pass through. We actually recommend to take out the Soxhlet chamber and rinse it with water and acetone and really clean it, maybe with a tissue, and then we can reuse the extraction chamber for the next extraction. The taking out of the extraction chamber is really easy and not complex, so this is also an advantage, that the access is really good for cleaning purposes. Someone asked about to explain the smart drying functions and what are the benefits. Smart drying is an automated drying step. As I mentioned, in the drying, we always actually have a dilemma. We want to be as fast as possible, but it needs to be as gentle as necessary. So it really depends on the solvent amount that is used in the extraction step and how much time it takes to boil this off. And it can be different from position to position whenever you have different sample volumes. And then the level sensors are in a different place, you need different solvent volumes. But you only have one method for all 6 positions. So this can be quite tricky. That is why we introduce a smart drying. The smart drying calculates the drying time that is necessary depending on the solvent volume that is present in the system. So this can be done either with the chamber filling. We know how much time it takes to clear one chamber filling, and this is actually used to calculate the drying time. Actually, I will not tell you all the details because this is actually developed here in-house and also our knowledge, but it's really working, so you don't have to think about any drying times or heating levels, just switch on smart drying and you're relieved from any troubles around drying. So now so many questions, I have to scroll a little bit. So are you using also PTFE inserts in E500 to reduce solvent content? This is actually in the previous version of instruments, we had expansion elements to get rid of solvent volume to make the cycles faster. For the new instrument, we don't have these type of inserts anymore because the chamber volumes are a lot smaller and it's no need for that anymore. Are all the programs on one button push, or does every time you load the sample you need to set some parameters? Actually, you have a memory, you can program extraction methods, and then at the beginning of the extraction, you choose the extraction methods and then you press start. There's no more programming to do. So you program your methods once, you can save it on the interface, and then you just choose it and start the extraction. What kind of sealite should we use during hydrolysis? Actually, there are many different sealite qualities and particle sizes. We actually recommend to use the, I hope I'm not mistaken, the 545. And we also actually tested different manufacturers, and we recommend to order actually the sealite at BUCHI. We provide this, you can order it directly from us with the sealite quality that we recommend and we found to be the best one for the acid hydrolysis and for this purpose. It is possible to reuse the solvent. Yes, it is possible, especially for fat determination. When you don't do like, if a customer does contaminant analysis, really trace analysis, there, of course, they would choose fresh solvent for every extraction. But for fat determination, where you don't, it's no trace analysis, so it's really possible to reuse the solvent. This also reduces your cost per sample, and it's really worthwhile using, and also reduces the cost to dispose the organic solvent. There's no problem for that. There's another question. Do you also solve the problems with sand, which can go to the valve, like in the E816 Soxhlet? So in the old version of the automated Soxhlet units, there was one tank valve that could be a problem whenever there was sand particles in the collection funnel of the condensed solvent, and these sand particles go into the tubes and into this valve, it could get blocked. The new instrument has a completely different type of valve, and we don't have any problems anymore with sand or any dust or any dirt particles that could block the valve. So this is completely different and cannot be compared. So this issue was really solved and completely re-engineered in the new units. Does the solvent reuse affect results in other analysis? Yes, it can affect. As I said, especially for trace analysis, where the blank values are really important, no analyst would reuse solvents. But for fat determination, where we are really in the milligrams, grams area, this is no issue. Of course, if the solvent gets dirty or wet with water or whatever, your bottle is dirty where you collect it, then of course you can also have problems. But if a good laboratory practice is used, this is no issue. What is the best particle size of feed ingredient to be ground, for example, for forage? I cannot really say this particle size that is best. This really depends on the sample and on the dryness of the sample. Maybe you have to answer this later, or sometimes they're also in standard methods. It's described how the samples need to be grinded and what kind of particle size max can be used. But at the moment, I don't have an answer to that question. There's one question, solvent for extraction. We can use 4 different solvents on the FatExtractor E-500. These are petroleum ether, hexane, diethyl ether, and chloroform. So these solvents are mostly used for fat extraction. If someone has a method that demands for other solvents, we have another instrument called Universal Extractor E-500. There on this unit, you can use any solvent, any organic solvent, the widest range of organic solvents. So it depends really on the solvent, which instrument you have to use. The solvent that is used for fat determination needs to be non-polar, because also fat is non-polar. So normally you adjust the solvent depending on the analyte you want to extract. Can I also use drying, also microwave to fast up drying? Yes. In all our application notes that you can download from the BUCHI application finder, you'll find that we actually dry the samples with microwave oven after the hydrolysis step. This can really speed up the process. It reduces the time considerably, but it is actually the microwave conditions need to be optimized as well. So each microwave has a different watt number, and the time need to be adjusted. So it can be easily burned if you microwave your sample at a too high level for a too long time. But we have indications of times and watt numbers in our application notes, but you have to adjust it to your local microwave. Can we have copy handout slides of this webinar? Thank you very much. Yes, we actually record this webinar and will be on YouTube in a few hours or maybe in a few days. And we will also can give you the PDF of this presentation. Any challenges of extracting of sticky samples with Soxhlet method? Sticky samples are normally no problem because we actually use paper thimbles to put the sample in. But if it's sticky, this means to me that it's still a little bit wet. So I would recommend to mix a sticky sample with sand or with sodium sulfate or sea light to mix it up and increase the surface and extract, put it then into a thimble and extract it to get good results. Another question is, what are the advantages of using glass extraction cups rather than aluminium? Can we use a heater for drying of the sample? If yes, under which conditions? BUCHI is famous for glass parts, for glass components. So this is also the reason that we have glass cups and not aluminium cups as other suppliers of extraction units. The advantage of glass is also that you can see what's happening. So if your sample is splashing, foaming, boiling too hard, you can immediately see it and interfere by reducing the heating level, for example, or by stopping the extraction when it's already finished or whatever. In the aluminium cups, you do more like a blind flight and you cannot really see what's happening inside. Can we use a heater for drying of the samples? Actually, the drying step is already included in the extraction step within the instrument in the fat extractor. So we have first an extraction step, then a rinse step, then a drying step. So most of the solvent is already evacuated and evaporated from the sample. And the residual solvent traces, they're eliminated by drying the beakers in a commercial drying oven, as you have it in all the laboratories. We usually dry it at 102 degrees to get rid of also of traces of water. Yep, that's my answer to that question. Can you use fat after extraction to determine fatty acids with GC-MS? If somebody is interested in the fatty acid profile, so the quality of the fat after the extraction, we normally don't do a acid hydrolysis because this can change actually the structure of the fatty acid. So that's why we would do a direct extraction without acid hydrolysis, and then of course you can use the fat for this determination. There's again a question about how many times you can reuse the solvent for fat determination. My experience is really that you always have to fill up a little bit of fresh solvent because some of the solvent is lost because it's soaked up by the sample. And by adding 1 part of fresh solvent every time, you can reuse it a long time. How difficult or simple is the cleaning procedure? Actually, what's really easy and advantage of BUCHI's extraction units is that all the glass parts are freely accessible. So you can take away the safety shields, pull out the drawer with the extraction chambers, and really just take them out. So it's really easy to clean. There's no cover that you need to screw off or whatever. It's really just take out the glass chambers, clean them, or even the condenser whenever they're really dirty, whatever kind of incident happened. Take out the condensers, clean them, and reinsert them. It's really easy accessible. It does not need any service technician to dismount the instrument. What about boiling stones in the old unit? Can we still use boiling stones once more than 1 time if we wash them with petroleum ether? In the new instrument, we have a boiling surface, so there's a special surface on the bottom of the beakers that actually replace the use of boiling stones. That's why we normally don't use boiling stones for the fat determination with the new units. Of course, it's still possible to add boiling stones in order to be really sure and really prevent boiling retardations at all times, because this rough surface that we have can get dirty or wrapped off after a certain time. So yeah. If you use boiling stones, it's really our experience to replace them every time, because the principle of the boiling stones is that there are small pores where the air bubbles or like the vapor bubbles are generated and the boiling retardation is prevented. And whenever they are used, these pores have not the same quality or same size anymore, same properties anymore. So we really recommend to use them only once. For an external cooler, then to replace distilled water so that there is no blooming water. Yes, you can attach, you can connect a recirculating chiller to provide you the cooling water for during the extraction. We recommend actually to use a recirculating chiller to really save tap water. Yeah, to be sustainable and water saving. There's recirculating chillers from BUCHI, the F305 or 308 that suit best for the fat extractor, and it's even possible to add a communication cable so that the recirculating chiller starts pumping around the coolant water when the extraction starts, and it also will shut off when the extraction has ended. How to dry the sample before the extraction? Is temperature 70 degrees sufficient for forage? We always dry samples at 100 degrees to be sure that really the water is away, has evaporated. Sometimes this high temperature can deteriorate your sample type. I'm not so familiar with forage, how this behaves. If you dry at 70 degrees, this would really extend then your drying time that is necessary. Maybe you need to do some intermediate grinding, re-steering of the sample to increase the surface and turn it around. Or if you really need these low temperatures, you can also use like a vacuum drying oven to increase the drying efficiency at lower temperatures. For feed samples, is it necessary to hydrolyze the samples before extraction? This is a very good question, because actually we cannot give an easy answer on that. We made application notes with feed samples. You find it on our application finder on the BUCHI's webpage, and there we work according to the European standard method. And there they say you need to do a hydrolysis if you get higher fat recoveries with hydrolysis. If you get the same results, you can do the extraction directly without hydrolysis. And in our experience, for all the samples that we tested, it was almost always the case that hydrolysis step really increased the fat recovery. But of course, there it really depends on the sample. And actually, there are two procedures, A and B, one with, one without hydrolysis. You have to carry out both and compare, and then you have to choose depending on the results. I really recommend you to read these application notes, because there you can find all the explanation how this method works and how to decide for which procedure. Concerning the analyte protection sensor, when should we use it? I did not go into details about the analyte protection sensor on the fat extractor, but this is actually a nice feature that is an option for the fat extractor. There's actually a red light pointing through the extraction beakers, and with this red light, actually it's determined if there's still enough solvent in the beaker or if the beaker is getting empty. We actually recommend to add the analyte protection sensor for Soxhlet and for ECE instruments, because they have long extraction processes. So whenever there's a leakage or there was an error in adding solvent, this will be detected by the analyte protection sensor, and then the instrument will give you an error message. You have the chance to refill solvent and restart the extraction process. For hot extraction, you have very short extraction time, so the benefit is not the same as for the Soxhlet as for the ECE. The only thing for all instruments, this is valid for all instruments, it prevents user error, so you will not be able to start an extraction without a beaker present or with an empty beaker present. So this is prevented by this analyte protection sensor, and to reduce this user handling errors. What is the difference between the universal extractor and the E-500? I mean, how can one be used with any type of solvents and the other with the mentioned ones only? Yes, this is one big difference. So the heating power is different. It's not possible to boil high boiling solvents on the fat extractor, but only on the universal extractor. But there's also other differences. One major difference is actually the multitasking feature. So in the fat extractor, as it really used for routine fat determination, we have one extraction method that applies to all 6 extraction positions. In the universal extractor, we have this multitasking feature. That means that we can apply different extraction methods on each position. So there we have the full flexibility. You can use different solvents, different extraction methods, different extraction parameters on every position, which is really helpful for method development, or if a laboratory has to deal with many different sample types, many different applications, you can do this at the same time on the universal extractor. My question is about heating levels. How can we assume level 1 to 7 in centigrades, and what is an ideal heating level for extraction? The heating levels have no correlation with temperatures. They are purely power controlled. So the max heating level is 10 and the lowest one is 1 for the fat extractor. And we actually optimized the heating levels for each solvent, for each extraction method and each extraction step. So whenever we have, for example, petroleum ether for Soxhlet, it will give you heating level 6 for extraction step. And this is the ideal heating level for this application. Of course, it can vary a little bit depending on the sea level of your laboratory, or on the ambient temperature of your laboratory, or maybe on the quality of the petroleum ether, as this is a mixture. But then, of course, you're able to reduce or increase the heating level according to your need. Oh, many questions, but I came to an end on my list. So whenever you have other questions, please insert them into this question box. Apparently, I answered all the questions that you have for the moment, but of course, BUCHI is still there for you. So whenever you have questions on the instrument or on your extraction process or extraction parameters, do not hesitate to contact your local dealer or local BUCHI representative. They're always there to help you, to sort you out. We also have an application laboratory in Flawville, so whenever you have a very tricky sample where you don't know you're not sure if it's working, or you can always your local BUCHI dealer can always get in touch with us and sort out if you can do a feasibility study on your specific sample. So it's important that you know that we're always there for you to support you with your extraction questions and your problems and challenges that you have in your laboratories. And I'm very happy that you all have been joining us for this today's webinar. Spend 1 hour all around extraction, and I wish you all the best, stay healthy, and good luck with your extractions.